The letter was found folded inside a medical ledger, its edges stained a deep brown that was not ink. It read, "If I vanish, do not search the woods. Search the children." In the summer of 1870, in the rural outskirts of Alabama, a physician named Dr. Elias Whitmore arrived at Briarwood Plantation to conduct what was described as routine medical examinations. 3 weeks later, he was gone. No body, no witness, no explanation, only that letter. The official record claims he left town suddenly. Some say he fled debts. Others whisper scandal. But the plantation ledgers tell a different story, one hidden in numbers, initials, and unusual medical notations beside the names of children who never reached adulthood. Briarwood was not just a plantation. After the Civil War, it had transformed into something else, part orphan refuge, part church-sponsored boarding school for children of former laborers. It was praised in newspapers as a symbol of renewal, redemption, Christian mercy. But by 1870, several children had fallen ill with symptoms no local doctor could explain. Night terrors, sudden fainting, voices heard in empty rooms. And then the church summoned Dr. Whitmore. He was known as meticulous, rational, a man who believed every illness had a cause, and every cause could be traced. He brought journals, instruments, a heavy leather case. He did not know that Briarwood kept its own records, not of illness, but of obedience. And whatever he discovered inside those children, it followed him. After the Civil War, plantations across the South collapsed under economic ruin. But Briarwood survived. Its owner, Reverend Matthew Calhoun, announced a transformation. The land would now serve God. The slave quarters would become dormitories. The main house would become a seminary annex for displaced children. Newspapers in Montgomery praised him. Donations flowed in from churches across Alabama. But something about Briarwood did not change. The old oak trees still leaned inward, as if listening. The quarters were rebuilt, but the foundations were not replaced. And beneath those foundations were older rooms, root cellars, storage pits, spaces once used for confinement. Children began arriving in groups, some orphaned by war, others sent by struggling families who believed Briarwood offered safety. What they found instead was structure, rigid schedules, mandatory prayer at midnight, isolation for unruly spirits. The church called it discipline. The children called it the quiet room. When illness began spreading among them in early 1870, Reverend Calhoun insisted it was a test of faith. But parents complained. Donors demanded answers. So a doctor was summoned. Dr. Whitmore arrived by carriage in May, greeted by smiling clergy and rows of silent children standing in unnatural stillness. He noticed immediately. They did not blink often. They did not fidget. They did not whisper. They simply watched him, as if measuring him. Dr. Whitmore began with the youngest, a 6-year-old girl named Clara Jennings. She complained of headaches, of shadows that moved along the ceiling beams, of hands that touched her feet at night. He examined her pupils, slightly dilated, pulse steady, no fever. Yet when he asked her to describe the shadows, she replied, "They're not shadows. They are waiting." Waiting for what? For the bell. There was no bell at Briarwood. Not officially. Over the next 2 days, he examined 12 children. Each reported similar symptoms. They woke at the same hour every night. They heard a tone, low, distant. They felt compelled to rise from bed and stand facing the north wall. Dr. Whitmore inspected the dormitories. No bells, no visible mechanisms, no drafts or structural issues. But he did notice something else. Each bed had a small carving etched beneath the frame. A circle. Inside it, 3 vertical lines. He asked Reverend Calhoun about the symbol. The Reverend smiled. Old carpenter's mark. Means the wood is stable. But Whitmore had studied trade markings. He had never seen that symbol. That evening, he wrote in his journal, "The children exhibit synchronized behavior. Suggestion? Conditioning? Something environmental. Yet I sensed deliberate concealment." That was the last full journal entry found. The remaining pages were torn out. On the 4th day, a boy named Samuel broke formation during prayer. He screamed. Not words, just a sound, raw and desperate. He clawed at his ears and shouted, "Make it stop ringing." There was no ringing, at least none that adults could hear. Reverend Calhoun ordered Samuel taken to the quiet room. Dr. Whitmore insisted on observing. The quiet room was beneath the main house. Down narrow wooden stairs, air damp and metallic. The room contained nothing but a wooden chair bolted to the floor, and the symbol, carved into every wall. Circle. 3 lines. Whitmore felt something change in the air as they entered, a pressure, almost like altitude shift. Samuel was placed in the chair. The Reverend knelt before him. "Confess the noise," he whispered. Samuel wept. Whitmore noticed faint bruising along the boy's wrists. Repeated restraint. He intervened, demanded explanation. Calhoun's expression hardened. "These children carry unrest in their blood," he said. "We remove it." "Remove it how?" The Reverend did not answer. That night, Whitmore searched the plantation archives and found a ledger older than the church, older than the war. It listed names, not of workers, but of children, with annotations. Responsive, silent, rejected. The dates went back to 1823. Briarwood had always kept children, and something else had always kept Briarwood. On his 6th night, Dr. Whitmore stayed awake in the dormitory. At exactly 2:17 a.m., every child sat upright in unison, eyes open, unblinking. Whitmore heard it then, a low vibration, not loud, not clear, but present, like a distant church bell submerged underwater. The children rose from their beds and stood facing north, toward the old oak grove. Whitmore followed them outside. The vibration grew stronger near the trees, then stopped. The children returned to bed without speaking. The next morning, Whitmore inspected the grove. Beneath one oak, the soil felt recently disturbed. He dug. 2 feet down, he struck wood. A buried structure. Not a coffin, a chamber. Inside were rusted metal rods arranged in a circular frame, connected by wires to nothing. An apparatus. Primitive. Intentional. And beneath it, carved into the wood. Circle. 3 lines. Whitmore realized then. The sound was not supernatural. It was engineered. For decades, something had been built beneath Briarwood to produce that tone, to condition obedience, to reshape behavior, and the children were the subjects. He confronted Reverend Calhoun that afternoon. The Reverend did not deny it. "You call it manipulation," Calhoun said calmly. "We call it salvation." That evening, Dr. Elias Whitmore packed his instruments. He told the children he would return with help. He never reached the main road. His carriage was found abandoned near the oak grove. No signs of struggle. No footprints leading away. Only his medical bag, left open. Inside it, the final note. "If I vanish, search the children." When Dr. Elias Whitmore failed to return to Montgomery, the county issued a brief notice. Physician departed unexpectedly. Personal matters presumed. No search party. No inquiry. Reverend Matthew Calhoun wrote to the doctor's family claiming Whitmore had completed his charitable duties and left in haste. The plantation resumed normal operation within days. Children attended prayer. Donors received polished reports. Illnesses were described as improving. But in nearby towns, rumors began spreading. A stable hand claimed he saw a lantern light moving through the oak grove the night Whitmore vanished. A former cook said the children had been gathered after midnight, all standing barefoot in the dirt, facing the trees. She left Briarwood 2 days later and never spoke of it again. What made the silence powerful wasn't force. It was agreement. Church leaders, donors, and local officials all shared an investment in Briarwood's image. After the war, communities needed symbols of moral rebirth. They needed proof that order could be restored. Admitting something was wrong would threaten more than a plantation. It would threaten the story of redemption itself. So the story was sealed. But buried stories do not rot quietly. They ferment. In 1891, 21 years after Whitmore's disappearance, a woman returned to Briarwood. Her name was Clara Jennings, the same 6-year-old girl who once described shadows waiting for the bell. She was now 27, married, reserved, childless. Her husband later testified, decades afterward, that Clara insisted on revisiting the plantation. She claimed she had left something unfinished. By then, Reverend Calhoun was elderly but still presiding over the property, which had transitioned fully into a boarding academy. Clara walked the grounds slowly, touching the oak bark, counting steps between buildings. Witnesses described her behavior as mechanical. Precise. She asked to see the dormitories. They refused. That night, Clara checked into a boarding house in town. At 2:17 a.m., she sat upright in bed. Her husband woke to find her standing barefoot by the window, facing north, toward Briarwood. He asked what she was doing. She replied calmly, "It's time." He insisted she lie down. She did. But the next morning, Clara was gone. Her shoes remained by the door. No signs of struggle. The boarding house owner swore she heard faint humming outside just before dawn. Clara was never found. 2 disappearances. Same plantation. Same hour. In 1903, a young archivist from Birmingham began cataloging old plantation records across Alabama. His name was Thomas Hale. He had no interest in Briarwood specifically, until he noticed something strange. The same symbol found in Whitmore's notes appeared in documents predating the Civil War. A circle with 3 vertical lines. Hale traced it back further. Shipping manifests from 1819. Property transfers from 1804. Each marked discreetly with the symbol, but never explained. He discovered something else. The land Briarwood stood on had been purchased from a small religious sect in 1802, a group known as the Covenant of the Hollow. Very little documentation survived about them. Only fragments describing purification through resonance. Resonance. Hale wrote letters requesting more information. One reply from a private collector mentioned that the Covenant believed certain tones could extract moral corruption from the young. Not adults. Children. Because children, they claimed, were still malleable. Hale never published his findings. His research notes ended abruptly in 1904. Final line. The apparatus beneath the oak may predate the plantation itself. His office burned down 2 weeks later. Official cause: faulty oil lamp. By the early 20th century, Briarwood had produced dozens of graduates. Teachers, preachers, civil servants. Outwardly stable. Yet records show an unusual pattern. Many former students never had children. Those who did often reported that their offspring experienced severe night terrors around the age of 6. Always at the same hour, 2:17 a.m. Psychologists in the 1930s would later describe this as inherited anxiety response. But anxiety does not synchronize across generations without a shared trigger. Several former students described hearing a tone in moments of extreme stress, a vibration under their thoughts, as if something were calling them back. None returned to Briarwood after Clara Jennings disappeared. The plantation-turned academy continued operating quietly, but enrollment slowly declined. Not from scandal, from something subtler. Families reported discomfort during visits, a pressure in the air, children refusing to sleep during tours, animals avoiding the oak grove. And through it all, the church maintained its message. Briarwood was a sanctuary, a place of structure, a place that removed unrest. But removed it where? Reverend Matthew Calhoun died in 1912. In his final sermon, witnesses recall a strange confession. He spoke not of sin, nor salvation, but of harmony. He described humanity as an instrument out of tune. He claimed Briarwood had been a tuning fork for the next generation. Then he said something that unsettled even his most loyal followers. Some vessels crack under refinement. Others resonate. After his death, renovation crews were hired to modernize the property. During excavation near the oak grove, workers uncovered remnants of the buried apparatus Dr. Whitmore once found. Metal rods, corroded wiring, a circular frame. But instead of preserving it, church officials ordered it dismantled and discarded. No photographs, no documentation, only verbal confirmation that it existed. Within a year, Briarwood closed permanently. The buildings were sold, the land divided, the oak grove cut down. Today, the area is farmland. Nothing remains of the quiet room, nothing visible of the buried chamber. But local farmers still report something unusual. At certain times of year, when humidity is high and wind is still, cattle gather near the northern edge of the property, standing motionless, facing the same direction, as if listening. And if you stand there long enough, you may hear it too. Not a bell, not exactly, just a low vibration beneath the earth, waiting. In 1936, a journalist from the Birmingham News tracked down one of the last living Briarwood students. His name was Elijah Moore. He was 72. He lived alone in a narrow house on the edge of town, windows covered, no photographs on the walls. The journalist expected stories about discipline, about hardship, about post-war poverty. Instead, Elijah spoke about sound. He said the first time he heard it, he thought it was thunder rolling under the floorboards. But it didn't pass. It lingered. He described how the children were told the vibration was God correcting their hearts. If they felt fear, it meant they were resisting. If they felt calm, it meant they were improving. The journalist asked about the quiet room. Elijah's hands began to shake. It wasn't punishment, he whispered. It was tuning. He claimed that the chair in the quiet room wasn't for restraint alone. Beneath it, hidden in the wooden planks, were metal rods connected to wires running into the ground. When the tones sounded, the chair vibrated faintly. Not enough to injure. Enough to unsettle. Enough to make a child believe the sensation came from inside their own body. The article was never published. The editor called it unreliable. Elijah Moore died that winter. The death certificate listed heart failure, but neighbors reported hearing a faint humming from his house the night before he passed. In 1947, a federal survey team began investigating abandoned southern properties for potential government repurposing. Briarwood's land, though divided, was still listed under its original charter. A young field officer named Daniel Hargrove was assigned to inspect the property. His report was meant to assess soil stability and structural remains. Instead, it became something else. Hargrove noted unusual underground formations near the former Oak Grove site. He described circular depressions in the soil and fragments of metal consistent with early resonance equipment. He referenced archived mentions of the Covenant of the Hollow. He even cited Thomas Hale's incomplete research. Then, in a section labeled Behavioral Observations, he wrote, "Local livestock gather at precise intervals near the northern boundary. They remain still for several minutes before dispersing. No audible stimulus detected by survey team." The final page of the report was classified. Not destroyed. Classified. Marked for internal review. The reason given? Potential psychological hazard. What psychological hazard could farmland present? Unless the hazard was not physical. Unless it was memory. By the late 1940s, scientific communities were exploring how sound frequencies influence behavior. Most experiments were harmless. But resonance, sustained low-frequency vibration, was known to cause disorientation, anxiety, even altered perception. If the Covenant of the Hollow had discovered primitive resonance techniques in the early 1800s, it would have been revolutionary and dangerous. Imagine convincing a child that a sensation triggered by hidden machinery was the voice of God. Imagine shaping obedience through vibration rather than violence. It would leave no bruises, no scars visible to outsiders, only internal alignment. Dr. Whitmore had suspected environmental conditioning, but he lacked the vocabulary of modern psychology. He sensed something engineered, something systematic. What he didn't know was that Briarwood may have been an early behavioral experiment, disguised as salvation, not conducted by the government, not initially, but observed, and perhaps later studied. Because Hargrove's classified report did not close the file, it expanded it. In 1952, a copy of Hargrove's report surfaced in a private estate auction in Montgomery. Tucked inside was a hand-drawn map. At the center, a circle, extending outward, 3 vertical lines, each pointing toward a different former religious property across Alabama. Briarwood was only one of 3 sites. The others? Closed seminaries, orphanages, all founded between 1800 and 1825, all associated with obscure sects preaching purification through structure. No direct evidence linked them operationally, but the symbol tied them conceptually. The Covenant of the Hollow may not have vanished. It may have simply dissolved into more acceptable institutions. Churches, schools, charities. The language changed. The structure remained. And children, always children, were the focus. Why children? Because children trust. Because children internalize. Because children can be shaped before they learn to question the shaping. Dr. Whitmore had stepped into a system older than the plantation, older than the war, and far more patient than any one man. In 1958, an elderly woman named Ruth Calhoun, granddaughter of Reverend Matthew Calhoun, gave a private interview to a local historian. She had been 10 years old when Whitmore visited Briarwood. She remembered him clearly. "He looked at us like we were sick," she said. "But we weren't sick. We were synchronized." She described how her grandfather believed chaos could be corrected, that certain frequencies aligned thought. He did not see himself as cruel. He believed he was refining the next generation. Ruth claimed the underground apparatus was dismantled publicly, but not entirely. Some of it was moved, she said. Moved where? She would not say. When pressed about Dr. Whitmore's disappearance, Ruth's response was quiet. "He tried to break the pattern," she said. Patterns resist disruption. She died 2 months later. Her interview notes vanished from the historian's archive. But one worker kept a piece of the metal rod. Years later, he described holding it near his ear and feeling faint vibration, though no sound was audible. Psychological suggestion? Possibly. But patterns resist coincidence. One family never left the Briarwood land after it was divided. The Whitfields. They farmed the soil for 3 generations. In 1992, the youngest Whitfield son began sleepwalking. Age 6. Always at the same time. 2:17 a.m. He would stand at the edge of the field, facing north. His parents assumed stress, imagination, until they noticed something else. Cattle were already there, standing in the same direction. Still, the boy claimed he heard the old music. No one had told him about Briarwood. No one mentioned the symbol. Yet one afternoon, while drawing at the kitchen table, he sketched a circle with 3 lines inside. His mother burned the drawing. They moved within the year. The land was sold again. There are no official records confirming wrongdoing at Briarwood. No documented crimes. No preserved machinery. Just disappearances. Just silence. Just fragments. But consider the pattern. A sect preaching purification through resonance in the early 1800s. A plantation repurposed into a boarding institution for children. An underground apparatus producing infrasound at 2:17 a.m. A physician who noticed synchronized behavior and vanished. A former student who returned decades later and vanished. A journalist whose article was buried. A researcher whose tape disappeared. A classified government report citing psychological hazard. A relocated chamber uncovered long after closure. Generations of children waking at the same hour. The same symbol appearing across properties. Circle. 3 lines. If this were simply folklore, it would fade. But it doesn't. Because the mechanism was never spiritual. It was structural, engineered. And structures, once built, can be rebuilt. The land where Briarwood stood is quiet now. No oak grove. No dormitories. No quiet room. But sometimes, late at night, when humidity presses low and the wind falls silent, residents nearby report an uneasy stillness. Animals stop moving. Air feels dense. And though nothing rings, something resonates. When historians revisit the fragments of Dr. Elias Whitmore's notes, one line stands apart from the rest. The children are not sick. They are synchronized. That single observation may have been the reason he never left Briarwood alive. Whitmore did not believe in curses. He did not believe in possession. He believed in cause and effect. He understood that if a stimulus is repeated long enough, especially during childhood, it becomes internal. A vibration introduced nightly would eventually no longer feel external. It would feel like thought, like instinct, like conscience. And if you tell a child that the sensation is God correcting them, they will grow up believing obedience is natural, not forced, chosen. Whitmore likely realized something else. The tone itself was not the final goal. It was the foundation. The real purpose of Briarwood was not punishment. It was imprinting. Scattered fragments about the covenant of the hollow describe a core idea. Human will is flawed. It must be aligned early. They believed society decays because children grow without structure strong enough to override impulse. Their solution was not chaos. It was precision. They sought a way to create adults who felt internal discomfort whenever they drifted from authority. Not through visible violence. Through invisible correction. Resonance was their method. They discovered, accidentally or intentionally, that certain frequencies produced unease. But unease alone was not enough. Scattered fragments about the covenant of the hollow describe a core idea. Human will is flawed. It must be aligned early. They believed society decays because children grow without structure strong enough to override impulse. Their solution was not chaos. It was precision. They sought a way to create adults who felt internal discomfort whenever they drifted from authority. Not through visible violence. Through invisible correction. Resonance was their method. They discovered, accidentally or intentionally, that certain frequencies produced unease. But unease alone was not enough. It had to be ritualized, paired with prayer, framed as moral failure. Over time, the child would associate internal anxiety with personal sin, and relief with submission. The covenant dissolved publicly by the early 1800s. But its philosophy did not disappear. It adapted. Churches adopted language of discipline. Boarding schools emphasized obedience. Institutions valued quiet compliance. The symbol remained subtle. Circle. 3 lines. Alignment within containment. Whitmore vanished because he recognized the system. Clara vanished because she returned to it. Margaret vanished because she recorded it. None of them were violent threats. They were observers. Witnesses disrupt patterns, especially patterns built on silence. But here is what makes the story unsettling. There is no evidence the resonance was ever fully dismantled, only relocated. Metal fragments were removed, but underground channels could remain. Low-frequency sound can travel through soil, through water, through structure. It does not require visible machinery to persist. All it requires is a source, an intention. What if Briarwood was not an isolated experiment? What if it was a test site? The 1952 map linking 3 former religious properties suggests a network. 3 points, 3 lines, a triangle. If resonance was introduced in multiple locations across decades, subtle behavioral shaping could spread quietly. No single generation would notice. Each would believe their discomfort was personal, private, spiritual, and perhaps that is why the pattern feels familiar even now. Have you ever felt unease without reason? A pressure before making a decision that defies expectation? An invisible pull toward conformity? Most of us dismiss it as anxiety. But Whitmore wondered whether anxiety can be engineered, and if engineered long enough. Inherited. Dr. Whitmore's last message was simple. If I vanish, search the children. He did not say search the woods. He did not say search the church. He said search the children. Because whatever was happening at Briarwood was not about buildings. It was about imprint. The true legacy of Briarwood was not buried chambers. It was adults who never realized their internal voice might not be entirely their own. The plantation is gone. The oak grove cut down. The quiet room erased. But patterns do not require walls. They require repetition. And repetition can hide inside culture, inside education, inside expectation. So here is the question the Forgotten Files leaves you with. If a tone shaped generations without them knowing, how would you ever prove it stopped? Maybe the bell was never meant to be heard, only felt. And maybe that is why, on certain nights, when the air is heavy and the world is still, some people wake at 2:17 a.m. Not because something is calling them, but because something once did. And the body remembers what history tries to erase. Dr. Elias Whitmore tried to interrupt a pattern older than himself. He stepped into a system built quietly over decades. He identified it, and then he disappeared. No body, no confession, no closure, only resonance, and a warning that still echoes beneath the surface.